Hello everyone, welcome back to Multimagic's channel. In this video, we'll be diving into the first version of the HLD and LLD, that is high level design and low level design of our authentication library. Before diving into the video, let me tell you something. We have some talented interns joining us for next 3 sprints, which adds up to about 6 weeks, right? So we have prepared a detailed HLD and LLD documents to help divide tasks and provide a clear path forward. Okay. This video is designed not only to assist our interns in understanding their responsibilities, but it also to serve as a resource for anyone who is interested in creating an authentication library. So without any delay, let's get started. So basically we are using React to build this authentication library for front end. For backend, we haven't yet decided, but the main agenda is we want to build an mock adapter where front end itself acts as a backend. So we'll write the main logic, whatever we have in the backend, we'll write that in front end only. In the next sprint, maybe in the next sprint, we'll concentrate on the backend. So please keep watching this series if you want to understand how we are building this whole authentication library and what are the other libraries we are building on. Okay, so yep, I think we are good to start now. So yes, if you run any React application, the initial file which triggers is this index.tsx or JS. I mean, if you are using JavaScript, it will be, we can tell that as index.js, or if you are using TypeScript, you can see that file named it as index.tsx. Okay, so now I will not use any tsx or js. I'll try to keep it very simple. I'll use like the index component. Okay, I'll use some layman terms and general terms. Okay, so yes, we will get triggered with this index component, and in this index component, this plays a role kind of a main file, right? So where you will import some modules and styles. If you import any modules and styles here in this index component, it will show the effect on each and every component globally. Okay, these are global styles. Okay, and basically in index, so if you have looked into any React project, if you just install React and if you create a simple hello world example or the basic hello world example which React automatically gives you, so if you observe that, you'll have an index.html file. In that index.html file, we'll have a div with ID of root. So basically inside the body tags, we'll have a div with ID of root. So what we are doing is, what is happening in this index.html is, sorry, in this index component is, it will bring that div with respect to its ID, okay, and it will check whether it's a root element or not. If yes, it will create a React root, and inside that, I mean, the main essence of this index component is inside that body we have a single div, and what should we have to display in that div? That is what this index component is handling. So basically, what we are telling is we are getting the root element, and we are creating a root, and basically inside that root element, we are rendering this app component. Okay, this app component will be imported in this import modules and styles. Okay, if we don't have any root element, then we'll throw an error. Okay, let us see the app component first. So as I told, this is the app component, and this is the component which we'll use here. I mean, this is what I'm speaking about, this app. Okay, so in this app component, we have multiple layers. Okay, I'll keep it as multiple components or multiple layers. I'll use some general terms. Okay, so basically we have this mega layout at the top. Okay, so basically this mega layout will be, I mean, can use the operations logic and whatever is implemented inside the snack bar provider and authentication provider and MIGA theme and cache provider and adapter provider. So basically it can use all the functionality of these components. Okay, like that snack bar provider, actually it's a library, but let us talk about this authentication provider. This authentication provider also can use the whole logic whatever is implemented in MIGA theme and adapter provider. Okay, and the same way MIGA theme will use the uh, inner functionalities of this if they want to. But if you are like in this app component, we can see that this adapter provider is necessary for authentication provider. I will show you later. Okay, so which provider will use the functionalities of which providers. Okay, you'll get to know that soon. Okay, so yeah, before importing this app component to this index component, what are we doing is we are just wrapping this app component with app providers. So basically, what is with app providers? Why do we use that? Let us think about it. Okay. So we have these components, right? So these mega layout and all components. But to add some generic error handlers, and if we want to have a common space where all these components can interact with each other, we need to build a Redux state management system, right? So that is what we are handling here. And if you observe, with this with app providers, we are providing app component as our input, right? So this input is nothing but this is app component. So app component can use the centralized state management, whatever the logic which is there in the Redux state management, it can be used through this provider. And this localization provider, it means suppose if our app is in English, if any user wants to change that to French, so he can, I mean, if he change the language, it should be applied to all components, right? So that is why we wrapped this in location. I mean, we wrapped it in location provider. Okay, and in app context, basically we'll add some routing stuff and all. This is error boundary component, which is a default library in React, where you can catch the errors which are occurring in the component. So and we can display that. Okay, and before sending into before sending this app component to index component, what are we doing is we are just wrapping it up with a function. That way we'll have extra providers here. Okay, that's all. So basically this is the main entry point where you'll start for any React application, but we have this additional layer and we have our own logic. Okay, so let us start with this adapter provider, which is here. Okay, let us understand what is this adapter provider and what is the functionality of this, what is the flow of this. Okay, so basically in adapter provider, I mean, before explaining the whole flow of this adapter provider, let me explain you what is the use case of this adapter. Why did we created this adapter provider? Okay, so let us assume we have in authentication, basically we have this login functionality, sign up functionality, and we also can consider these things, this recovery password management and OTP management, OTP service management, and all these kinds of. For now, we let us assume that we don't have any backend code. Okay, let us assume that we don't have any backend code and we don't have any backend developers. So what should we do? Okay, there comes this adapter provider into the main role. Okay, so in adapter provider, what are we doing is, suppose if we get any request or if we send any request to backend, in this adapter provider, what is happening means it will intercept that request. Basically, this extend mock adapter, whatever extend mock Axios adapter. Basically, we are sending the Axios request from front end to the backend. So what this extend mock adapter will do is it will intercept that request and it will check the URL, whatever we are, what is the REST API we are targeting for, and it will check the match and it will match that request and it will it will send that request to the API mock handler, which we will implement. Okay, and that API mock handler will take care of the whole request and it will process the information. Suppose if a user clicked on sign in button, so what this extended mock adapter will do is it will send it will intercept the request of sign in and it will send to this block where we will match the request and where we will have a separate handler for sign in request, and that handler will generate a JWT token and it will store the token in the session and it will send that request back again to Axios and Axios will send the response to rendering UI. I think it should be like this. Give me a second. It should be like this, guys. So we are sending the mock response. Where is this request handler? This sign-in handler or whatever getting the responses. We'll have some mock API .json, like kind of we'll have some .json file. We'll have some .json file where we'll have some dummy data. We'll have some dummy data. Okay, so let me wrap it up. I told you the basic essence of this. Let me explain you clearly. Okay, so whenever this adapter provider triggers, this is a context provider basically. If you know the basics of React or if you know what is the concept of context provider, then you will be able to properly map what I am saying. Let me quickly discuss what is this context provider. Suppose if we have a component, okay, let us keep that as CP, and basically we'll have the closing time. So basically in this component, what are you doing is you are creating a context. You are creating a context. In this, you'll write your variables, methods, and whatever the logic you want to perform, you'll write inside that. Okay. But if you keep any components in between these two tags, if you keep any components in between these two tags, let us assume we have component A. This component A can use the logic of this context. This context provider, which is it can use all the variables, all the methods, and all the logic of this. So if you observe here, in this adapter provider, it's a context provider. Okay, and this it's a context provider. So Mega layout, this authentication provider and cache provider, everyone can use the methods, the variables, and the logic of whatever there inside the adapter provider. Okay, so let us focus on this adapter provider now. So in this adapter provider, what are we doing is we are just initializing a mock adapter. I'll tell you what is this, but let me so bear with me. So we are just initializing a mock adapter and we are setting some auth API mocks because we are building this authentication model, right? So we need to write the mock APIs of authentication, whatever the mock APIs of authentication. Okay, and also we are keeping a flag whether we need to enable this or not. That way, in future, if we have any backend services enabled for us, then we'll keep this mock flag as 0, where we'll skip this mock API and response and all. Okay, we are getting the data from this dummy data, right? So in future, if we have any backend services enabled, then what we'll do is we'll get the real data only from the backend itself, right? So yep. Now, after initializing this external mock adapter and after creating the auth API mocks and after checking this mock flag, what are we doing is we are doing a loading check. If we have any loading enabled, then we'll show the loading screen. No, if not, we'll show the uh, rendering UI, whatever. Like suppose if we have the login screen which is rendering right now, authentication screen which is rendering right now, that is what will show here. Okay, let me tell you what is this process. Okay, what is this three block handling. Initially we'll have these three initially we'll define some values where we'll keep loading as false, because if we keep loading as true, it doesn't make sense, right? It will always show the loading screen, right? So initially we'll keep the loading. We'll decide a state variable. Okay, we'll keep a state variable where we'll keep loading value as false, and if it is false, it will display this. Okay, so the initial screen what we'll get is the authentication screen only. Okay, let me tell you what is this block. What are the main importance of these three blocks? Okay, before that, let me clean this. I hope you understood the concept of context provider. Okay, so in traditionally, what we'll do is if any user clicked on sign in, okay, what it will do? It will send a request to backend, right? So it will take some time for the backend to process the request, right? To process the request and to generate the response. Okay, and to generate the response, and after generating this response, and it will send the response, right? So till our client, I mean this one, the person who clicked on sign in is client, right? So till he gets the response, he'll have some waiting time, right? So in that waiting time, we are showing this loading screen. Okay, in that waiting time, we are showing this loading screen. Okay, but as I told initially, we'll have this loading value as false, so will be displayed the UI first. Okay, so now let us see from the UI context. Okay, so okay, we got a UI where you'll have some form. Let us assume we are doing this authentication, right? So for example, if we take the sign-in functionality, we'll have some form to enter the email ID and the password. Okay, so after entering those details, if user clicked on sign in, we'll send a request to auth slash sign in, right? Then we don't have our backend. So the main use case of this adapter provider is it should work like backend, right? So this auth hyphen sign in, this API request will be intercepted by this extend mock adapter. Okay, this this extend mock this API request will be intercepted by this extend mock adapter, which is initialized here. Okay, so basically, if you understand, we are initializing this extend mock adapter so that it will be keep on listening to the whole system, whether any API request or going to the backend. So it will be keep on listening to that request. Suppose if we get any request like this, it will intercept that. And it will check what type of request it is. Is it a post request? Is it a post request or get request or put request or patch request? Okay, and now for us it is sign in, right? So it is a post request because we are posting the email and password to the backend, so that our backend will check the credentials and it will tell our client that whether he is an authenticated user or registered user, so and so. Okay, and this extended mock adapter, what will do is it will intercept asset. Okay, and it will pass that request to another service. Let us keep this as a service. What this service will do is it will take the URL. I mean, it will take the auth or sign in, auth slash sign in, and it will check for which auth handler we can send this request to. So it will send to the respective auth handler. Suppose we have an auth handler separately which we implemented for auth sign in. Okay, and that auth handler, what it will do is it will take the request and it will grab this some dummy data from this JSON file which we will provide, and it will check what is the data it is expecting, and it will take the data from the JSON file and it will prepare a data format in such a way that we can send a response, the real response how we'll get from the backend, and that response will be sent to the Axios. Basically, when user clicked on sign in, we are actually sending a request to this URL using the Axios only. So we will send our response back again to Axios, and what that Axios will do is it will send the response to the rendering UI, which is already rendering. That way, it will take the credential, it will take the response, and it can display the respective UI. Means now user is authenticated after sign in. Suppose if user is authenticated, it will send the response. In that response, what we'll have is we'll send a response code that is 200, means it is okay. Kind of we have this user and he is authenticated. So to this UI, and from this UI we'll display some other UIs, which makes sense, right? So it will display the dashboard like that kind of UI. Okay. So I hope you understood this adapter provider. Let me know if you have any questions on this adapter provider in the comments itself. Uh, I'll make sure that I'll reply them. Okay. So let us go to the another provider. Okay. This cache provider is an inbuilt library, so you can just watch the documentation of Material UI. I mean, we are using the Material UI for this React project. Okay, so let us talk about this MIGA theme. Okay, so if you observe, there is a main component of MIGA theme. So what does it do? So it sets the text direction and it applies the theme. So basically, in some languages we have this LTR and RTL. Okay, so basically we'll see the text direction from left to right, and in some other languages we'll see that right to left. Basically in Arabic people will start writing from right to left. So in future, if we add uh, any languages in such a way that that language they will start from right to left, that kind of things and all will be handled here globally. Okay, so where if you observe, this also applies the theme language and the theme which will have in default settings. I'll show you, don't worry. But the main usage of MIGA theme is it will set the text direction and it will apply the theme settings whatever we are giving. Okay, so there is an input of this component. So where are we getting this input from? Okay, let us observe. So basically we'll have this default settings of the theme for a theme and default settings for the direction. So these default settings will store them in Redux state management, and we'll implement some custom hooks, and in app component, which is the parent component of all, okay, which is a root component, So in this app component, we'll use these hooks to get the current language direction and the current main theme. Okay, we'll use those two things and we'll send that language direction theme to this mega theme as an input. And what this mega theme does is it will create a new theme based on these two values and it will display a UI. Okay, if user wants to change those values, means suppose if dark theme is enabled right now, and if the direction the text direction is right to left, now user wants to change to light theme and the text direction to left to right. Okay, so he'll change those settings in the UI itself. Will show some settings button on kind of. Even I'm not very sure of that, but the flow of that will be like we'll keep a settings button. Okay, where you can select the theme, what are the themes we are providing, and what are the directions we are providing. That is left to right and right to left. Okay, in UI he will select the change, and what it will do is it will again update in this Redux state management. So that is where like it will update in the Redux state management. So app component will render again. So this language direction and main theme will be fetched again. Again it will pass as input to this mega theme and again will generate a new theme and it will display the UI. So user can see the changes lively. Like if he choose this light theme, it will go to Redux and using the hooks app component will get those changes and mega theme will enable those changes so that user can see the changes through line. Okay, but the backend flow of this, the working of this is like this. Okay, now we just understood what is the use of adapter and what is the flow of it, what are the functionalities it will do, and what is the use of mega theme, what is the flow of this, and what is the functionalities this mega theme will do. And let us work on this authentication provider. Okay, because yeah, authentication provider. Let us watch this authentication provider. In this authentication provider, basically the main motive of this authentication provider is, the main motive of authentication library is we want to build a generic authentication library where we can seamlessly use this authentication library in React native applications, React applications. Okay, that is our end goal. So yeah, so we need to, some people in authentications, people follow different mechanisms, right? Some people follow Google authentication. uh, i mean uh, they'll have some traditional backend too, but some people use Firebase, some people use as I told JWT authentication, and some people need only Google sign in, some people need only Facebook sign in. So the main motive of this is we need to support multiple auths. Okay, so to provide, to support, to build this authentication library which provides multiple auths, we need to understand which authentication provider now the client is using. Okay, you got that right. Suppose if the client is using Firebase, so the provider is Firebase. If the client is using JWT, now the provider is Firebase. Sorry, JWT. I mean the backend. Okay. So what we'll do is in this authentication provider, we'll have some methods that to get the auth provider, to set the auth provider, and to reset the auth provider. Suppose if we are using Firebase auth provider, Firebase authentication system, or for your authentication you are using Firebase. You can frame it as any way, but I hope you got the. I hope you understand what. I hope you understood what I was. What is my intention? Okay. So suppose if user choose to maintain his authentication and all using Firebase. So what we'll do is we'll set the auth provider as Firebase in our browser's local storage. That is what we thought of right now. So that way if user logged in again, so first it will check that what is the auth provider we have right now in the local storage, or suppose if user refreshes, so it will check the auth provider, it will get the auth provider, and it will check which auth provider this current user is using, and then it will call the respective modules. Like suppose if user is using Firebase auth provider, it will call the Firebase auth module, and if suppose user is using JWT auth provider, we'll call the JWT module. Like that, we can extend this a lot. For now, in this sprint, we are focusing on this Firebase auth module and JWT auth module. Okay, now user got the auth provider. Now what to do? So we need to follow the authentication, right? So in this, let us go to Firebase auth module first. Okay. So basically, in Firebase auth module, what we'll do is we need to initialize Firebase first, right? So first we'll initialize the Firebase, and we will do an auto login. So that way, if suppose user refreshes, he is already logged in. So now he is refreshing that. So what we need to do? We need to check whether this user is already logged in or not. So that is where we are implementing a functionality for auto login. So it will check, and it will get the user if user is not authenticated. So we'll set flags that he is unauthenticated. Okay. If user is authenticated, we'll fetch the user info, and if we get any failure in fetching the user info, we'll set the status as unauthenticated again. If it is success, we'll update the user state, and we'll expose these methods of Firebase to this authentication module. Okay, in the same way, if you observe this JWT auth module, we'll initialize some context, some default methods. Okay, in such a way that we can do this auto login. Then we'll get a token. If we have a token, what we'll do is, if it is yes, we'll check the token validity. If it is no, then we'll set the user is unauthenticated. If the after that after we get the token, we'll check the validity of the token. So we'll check if token is valid, and if token is invalid. We have two cases. So if token is invalid, we'll set the user status as unauthenticated again. And if it is valid, we'll fetch the user info, and we'll have two cases again, either failure and success. In success cases, what we'll do is we'll update the user state, and we'll set the authentication status as authenticated. And if it is failure, we'll set the authentication status as unauthenticated. Okay, and we'll expose these methods of JWT context provider to authentication module. Okay, so let us see what this authentication module will do after taking all the values from these two modules. Okay, so now we got the status of the user, whether he is authenticated or unauthenticated, and we got the user info that might be empty. If it is unauthenticated, that might have some information, that has some information when he is authenticated. Okay, now it will check the auth provider, and it will also manage the loading state, like whether the current status of authentication, whether any authentication is checking whether a person is there or not there, a person is authenticated or not authenticated. In that time, this authentication module, what this authentication module does is, it will kind of show, or it will kind of keep a state that in some authentication process is in progress. Okay, and after that, once we get the values, the output of these two modules, this managed loading state will update its state to authenticated or unauthenticated. Okay, you got that, right? I think you understood. So in sign-in handler, in sign-out handler, we will have two handlers. Okay, suppose if user is authenticated, okay, then the sign-in handler will be called. Suppose if user is unauthenticated, or yeah, if user is not a right user, then we'll run the sign-out handler. Okay, in sign-in handler, what we'll do is we'll update all these will actually basically we have this user info and auth status, right? We'll update these data in the global state. Okay, and also we'll set the current auth provider in the local storage. That way, if user refreshes, then he'll understand which auth provider currently the client is using, and using that status, it will call the respective module, and it will get the status again, and again we'll update the global state. Okay, in Redux. And after updating the state, we'll have this module. You can see this, right? This one. So let us assume this as authorization module. Authorization. Okay. Let us assume this module as authorization. What this authorization module does is, it will take the inputs, it will fetch the value, it will fetch some values from global state. Okay, that is Redux. So what it will fetch is, it will fetch the user data, and it will fetch the auth status, and using these two values, it will check whether the user has respective permissions or not. Okay, whether the user has respective permissions or not, whether the users whether the user is there or not, whether the authentication state is authenticated or unauthenticated. It will check all those verifications, and it will route this user. I mean, suppose if user is unauthenticated, or if user doesn't have respective permissions, or if we have any other checks that we cannot display the next screen, what it will do is, it will show the login screen only. Suppose if user is authenticated and we have the right permissions, then it will display another UI, respective UI. Suppose let us assume if admin is logging, so it will display admin dashboard. If staff is logging, it will display staff dashboard, right? So that is the functionality of this whole authentication provider. So yep, in adapter provider, to summarize it, in adapter provider, we'll have some mock APIs where we'll have some dummy handlers, dummy auth handlers. It when I mean, how it will process is, suppose if we send any request to the backend, this extended mock adapter will intercept it, and it will pass to the respective handler, and we'll get the data from the JSON, which is dummy data, JSON file, and we'll send that as a response to this Axios, and this Axios will send that mock response to the UI again. That way it will display another UI. Okay, and the main functionality of this Mica theme is, basically we'll have some default settings, and we'll store those default settings in the global state. From there we'll use some default hooks, I mean the hooks which we implemented, and using those hooks in app component will fetch the language direction main theme, and using these two inputs, it will give us a new theme, and it will display the UI. Okay, and if user wants to change this again, the settings will be updated globally in the Redux, and the same process will follow. Coming to this authentication provider, in authentication provider we have different types of authentications, where we have, for now in this sprint we have this JWT authentication module, and we have Firebase authentication module. In this we have some default methods. Those are the methods which the Firebase library which will provide, and all, like sign in with email and password, sign in with Google, sign up with Google, and all. Okay, those APIs will be implemented here, and after this, after the functionalities which are inside this Firebase authentication module or JW authentication module, after these executions, it will get the auth status and the user data to this authentication module, and then what it will do is what is the current authentication provider and what is the user data, what is the auth status of the user data, and all. This authentication module, it will take all those data and it will update globally. And what this authorization component will do is it'll it'll fetch those values which are updated globally by this authentication module, and it will use those values until check whether the user is authenticated or unauthenticated and what are the permissions he have, what is the role and all. With respect to all those, it will display the respective UI. Okay, suppose like if admin is logging in, so it will display the admin dashboard. If staff is logging in, it will display the staff dashboard. Okay, there is a whole HLD of this. I mean the flow of how these components will work and all. Okay, I hope you understood. I hope you enjoyed watching this HLD diagram. Okay, now let us see this LLD of this. Like we'll try to dive into each functionality. I mean, what are the basic functions which we have, which we are going to implement and all. What are the functionalities? What are there in JWT auth module? What are there in Firebase auth module and all? Okay, let us explore those two. Okay, yeah. Now let us look into this LLD. Suppose if user opens our application, he'll be able to see the login screen first, right? So how he is getting that login screen? Okay, now we are going to look the logic behind how he is getting the login screen. Okay, when user opens our app, this authentication provider will be called automatically, and inside this, if you see, we have this initialize authentication, and we have some methods: get auth provider, set auth provider, and reset auth provider. What are these functions? Like this set auth provider will set the current auth provider which you are using in the local storage of the browser. The same way, reset will delete that auth provider and get auth provider. It makes sense with the name, right? So it will get the current auth provider. Okay. So once this authentication initializes, this block will be triggered. Okay. Here, for example, let us assume that user is using Firebase to log in. Okay, or else for example, we can also keep it like this. For now, in this authentication library, we are going to enable the Firebase authentication using some flags. Suppose if we give 0, then the Firebase authentication will be enabled. If we give 1, the JWT authentication will be enabled. If we give 0 and 1, then JWT and Firebase also will be enabled. So we can configure it like this. Let us see that later. Okay, in this authentication module, if we observe, we have some methods. Okay, we have this use Firebase auth, we have this in progress, is authenticated, unauthenticated, and handle sign in and handle sign out. Okay, in this authentication block, what we'll do is we'll trigger this use Firebase auth block. Okay, this is not a block actually; it is a component. Okay, or it is a service, or it might be a context provider. Okay, in this your use Firebase auth will initialize Firebase auth context. This is a context provider. Okay, so finally, what is happening using this authentication provider? This authentication is triggered, and from this authentication, will trigger this use Firebase auth, and from this use Firebase auth, will trigger this provider. Okay, what we'll do? It's a default call. Like if you know the concept of classes, you would have known this constructor concept too. Suppose if we create an instance for the class, and if we call that, if you use that instance, by default the constructor will be called. In the same way, when this component renders or when this component mounts, this use effect will be called. This kind of constructor. Okay. So in this use effect, what are we checking? Is the auth state changed? I mean, is there any user who is authenticated? Okay. If yes, it will set the user details. It will set the authentication status. If user is unauthenticated, then also it will set the user and it will set the auth status. But it will set the user to null and it will set the auth status to unauthenticated. Okay. Now this will be passed to authentication component. After this, it will check with respect to the user data and auth status whether the user is authenticated or unauthenticated. If it is unauthenticated, okay, then we will trigger this handle sign-out function. If it is authenticated, then we will trigger this handle sign-in function. So let us see what are they doing, these functions. So in handle sign-in function, actually we are targeting this Firebase, right? So it will set the auth provider, it will call the auth provider, and it will set the auth provider in local storage, that is maybe Firebase, okay, because we are using Firebase, right? So in handle sign out, what are we doing is we'll reset the auth provider, okay. Now, for now, initially we don't have any user logged in, or we don't have any person who wants to sign in and all. So that is why user data will be null and user will be unauthenticated. So finally, the two datas, whatever coming from this set user to authentication, set auth status to authentication, will be stored globally in Redux state management. Okay, so we'll store the user data and user auth status. From this Redux state management, what we'll do is we'll take those. I mean, we have another component that is called as authorization. So what this authorization will do is it will take the user data and it will take the user auth status, and it will, with respect to the data, if it is null then it is fine. If authentication status is unauthenticated, it will check, it will perform the logic in the way that who is the user, okay, what is authentication status, who is the user and what is his role, what are the permissions he have and all. It will check those all methods, those all logic in these functions, and this redirect route is responsible to uh, to define which UI to show for that particular user. Okay, suppose if we get suppose going to the current status, like we don't have any user and also we don't have any like we have unauthenticated auth status. Okay, now what this redirect route will do is it will render the login screen, which is this. Okay, suppose if a person enters the email and if a person enters his own password and if he clicked on sign, then from this sign in button we'll call this, sorry, give me a second, let me simplify. Okay, from this sign in button we'll call sign in function. We'll call this sign in function with the help of use Firebase auth, because this is a context provider, right? So whatever the logic is implemented in this, we can access through this. Okay, because we are importing this context here, so we can, suppose we have this context A. I mean this Firebase auth provider. Let us assume that the context name of this A. So we'll import this A here. So if we call the sign in method with the help of this, it will automatically trigger this sign in function. Okay, let me go again if it is not clear. Suppose if we click on sign in function, okay, we have this Firebase auth provider, okay, which is a context provider, right? So let us assume the context provider of this is named as F, okay, because if it is Firebase, so I just kept as F. So in use Firebase auth, what am I doing is I am importing F, okay. So I can use all this logic, whatever which is there inside this F, I can use that by using this, right? So all I need to include is this use Firebase auth, right? So what I'll do is I'll write like this, like kind of sign out, sign out, import it from use, sorry, import it from use Firebase auth, like this. This use Firebase auth will return this context provider, will return this F. So that is how means this use Firebase auth is returning that F, which is Firebase context provider. So this sign out is there in Firebase context provider. So with the help of this, I can access this sign out, right? So that is why I clicked on this sign in. Okay, this is sign out or sign in, whatever. Okay, but the process is same. Okay, so now this sign in will be called and it will talk to Firebase, or it will call the Firebase API, and Firebase will give the response, and the same concept which we use initially, that is once we get the user data from Firebase, let us assume it as, yes, let us assume it as Firebase console, okay. So once we get the data from Firebase console, this use effect will be called automatically, where you got the user data and you got the authentication status which is authenticated. So it will go here. Now it will check that yes, now the user is authenticated and we also have the data. So now the data and the auth status, authentication status, will be stored in the Redux state management. And now this Redux state management will use, sorry, this authorization component will use the data from the Redux state management, and what it will do is it will check what are the permissions, what is the role and all, and after that it will check which route I have to redirect to, and it will find out the route, and after that it will render that route, which is suppose we have admin and we also have the permissions, so that is why then it will show this UI where you can add some specific logics with respect to the role and all. Okay, I hope the sign-in process is clear. I hope the sign-in process is clear. Okay, so basically, if you observe, this is our main code, which will talk to the Firebase console. But this authentication component and this authorization component is responsible to display the UIs. Okay, what these two functions will, these two components will do is it will just expose the APIs of Firebase, that's all. But the whole logic whatever we have with respect to, I mean, suppose we got the user, what should we show to that user, the whole logic, the whole core logic is implemented in this authorization and authentication. That is that plays a key role. Okay, so now in this UI, suppose we have a profile photo here. If we click on that, if we click on logout, what will happen? We need to log it. We need to log out, right? So for before we log out, what do we need to delete from here? Okay. First things first, we need to set user data as none, right? And also we need to set authentication status to unauthenticated again, or else we need to keep some other flag that we we need to, I mean, yes, we can keep it as unauthenticated only, that is fine. Okay, and also if you observe, we have the auth provider which is stored in the local storage, and we also have to delete that, right? Because we are going to log out, so that means the it doesn't make sense if we keep Firebase in the local storage again. Okay, suppose if user logged in with JWT again, but if we find that in local storage we have the Firebase, it doesn't make sense, right? So that is why what we'll do is, if we click on logout, we have another component. It is similar to this use Firebase author only. Okay, what this will do is, let us see these apps. We have this initialize auth providers. So finally we have this Firebase auth provider and so on. So we'll initialize all them, and in sign out function, what we'll do is, see this get auth provider. If you observe, this get auth provider is going to this block. In sign out, what are we doing is, we are deleting that auth provider. First we'll get the auth provider and we'll delete that auth provider. Okay, and also using that auth provider, we'll also decide which sign out to be called. I mean, suppose now we are using Firebase, right? So we need to call sign out function which is in the Firebase, right? Because our main idea is it's an authentication library. So we are going to keep multiple providers, right? So we are going to keep Firebase provider, we are going to keep JWT, and also we are going to keep AWS and all, many things, many providers. Okay, so we need to decide which sign out to be called, right? So here using this get auth provider, we'll find out which auth provider to use, and we'll call the sign out function of respective auth provider using this Firebase auth. So, and it will call the sign out. Okay, I forgot to mention the function here, but we'll have the sign out function too, and it will be called, and the data will be removed from the session. And the token will be removed from the session, and the user status will be unauthenticated for now, and also the user data will be null. Okay, and at last the same process will happen again, but now we don't have any user, and also we have unauthenticated as auth status, and we'll come to authentication. We have these two as null, and then from Redux state management, we'll take the details using authorization component, and then we'll display the login screen again. Clean? I think the flow is clean for you. Let me know if you guys have any questions with respect to this Firebase authentication system. Again, I'll try to put another video if you want to. Okay, I'll try to figure out your doubts, and I'll clarify them, and I'll shoot another video, and I'll put them in the in this playlist. Okay, now let us go to this use JWT authentication. Okay, so see, if you observe, the diagrams are very similar. And the lower process is also very similar. It is pretty similar, right? So the major changes in Firebase, we have specific US, and the token and all, everything will be managed automatically. But in this JWT, we have to implement our own server, right? So the tokens and all, we need to properly store them. I mean, set session token and get access token, generate token, and all. We need to implement some other token methods and all. Okay. So in that sense, we will implement some other functions: sign in, sign up, sign out, set session, reset session, update, and token methods. That is generate new token, update the token, and all. Okay, but the process is very similar. Uh, if you want to understand this again, try to watch this Firebase process again and try to map it out. It will be very similar. There is no change at all. Okay, because that is the main benefit of this design. We had two types of authentications. All we have to do is we just have to replace these two files. See, that is the benefit of this design. Okay, let us go to this. We have Firebase here, right? What do we have here? Now, what are we doing is we are going to follow and adopt a design pattern here. Okay. Uh, Suddenly, I bought some unknown name. Let us discuss about this adopt a design pattern first. Okay. So, I hope you in your families, some of might have been in USA. Okay. And suppose let us assume that you are in India. Okay. If you buy any electronic goods, if we buy any electronic goods, okay, and if you import them or if you tell them to suppose as I told, if you have some known persons in US and if you tell them to bring a laptop, okay, for example, to bring a laptop for you, so they'll buy the laptop and they'll get you, right? Okay, we got the laptop. So now we need to keep we need to keep the power, right? We need to keep the charging and all, right? So if you observe that, suppose our adapter is this. Okay, in India we'll have cables, we'll have the plug points which we need to insert. I mean the adapter, the nodes which are connected to the adapter will be in this circle shape. But in USA, if you observe, those will be in straight line shape, which is not enough to uh, which will not fit in Indian plug points, India's plug points. Okay, so what will we do? What will you do? What we'll do is we'll buy a separate adapter. Okay, suppose we'll have this adapter. Okay, what we'll do is we'll take this Indian plug and we'll insert it here. Okay, we'll insert it here. Okay, after that, sorry, we'll take this US adapter and we'll insert it here. Okay, my bad, sorry. So we'll insert it here, and this will have this circular nodes which are connected to the adapter, which will fit inside India's plug points. Okay, so that way you will be able to charge the laptop which you got from USA. So if you observe, this is a adapter which is helping you, right? What is this doing actually? This is converting the, I'll tell in layman terms. Okay, suppose this one is USA's plug point. Okay, this is Indian's plug point, right? So the data which is coming from this USA plug point will be transferred to this first. What it will do is it will convert the data in a format where Indian's plug point can accept it. Okay, that is how you'll charge your US laptop. Suppose, for example, we have a box. Okay, suppose we have a B block. Suppose we have A block. Okay, here we have XML data. Okay, XML data, and we need to forward this XML data to B, which accepts only .json format data, JSON data. Okay, so what will you do? We'll write a converter that is XML to JSON, right? So this is our adapter. What it will do is it will convert. It will take the XML data, and this XML data will be converted into JSON, and this JSON data will be converted to. Sorry, this JSON data will be passed to the B block. Okay. Now let us go to the design. Here what are we doing is Here we are writing an Axios adapter, which is which is following the adapter design pattern. What it will do is we will check initially whether we have the backend enabled or not. Okay, means if we have the backend enabled, means we have a backend through which the client can connect. Okay, if we don't have any backend, we need to enable this as 1. If we have backend, we need to keep it as 0. Suppose, let us assume we don't have any backend. Okay, so let us go through this. If you observe in the HLD, I told you that we have this mock adapter. What we'll do is we'll send the request to the auth API handlers. That auth API handler will grab the data from the JSON file, I mean the dummy data, and it will pass to the Axios, and from that Axios it will be passed to the front end. That is the same thing happening here. That is this block. Okay. Here in this adapter provider, what are we doing is we are initializing an extended adapter. Okay. What are we doing is we are going to set up all mock APIs and all. I'll tell you what is this mocks. Okay. So basically, these are our mocks on get, on post handler, on get handler, on post handler, on put handler, on delete handler, on patch handler. These all are our mocks. So we are setting up those all. Okay. So what will we do is if mock enabled is 1. Okay. Now the request is sent to the adapter provider, and from there we'll find out which request we got. What is the request we got? I mean, we got the sign up request or sign in request, or it is a post request, or it is a put request, delete patch, that kind of request. We'll find it out using these helper functions. I mean, we'll transform the URL, we'll convert the URL to mock API URL, and these helper functions will do those kind of operations. And suppose if we got an get request, let us assume. So it will call this mock handler. So it will check whether the token is valid or not. So after that, it will fetch the user. So what it will do is it will go to the JSON data, whatever we have. That is, this is our dummy data. This is our dummy data. This is our dummy data. So from this dummy data, what we'll do is we fetch the user. In the same way, if we get an on post request for sign in and refresh, we have on post request for 2 things. So that is for sign in and refresh. So in sign in, we'll get the user details, that is email and password, right? So what we'll do is this sign in handler, it will check those details, that email is there or not, that password is there or not. It will check and it will return the status. So in the same way, the other handlers will be called, and once after getting the data, what it will do is it will send all the data as response to this. Okay, and now what will it do? It will send the response to JWT auth provider. In that, in use effect, there the user data and the authentication status will be assigned. Okay, so from there the authentication will be called, and the data will be stored in the direct state management, and after that you'll be able to display this page or this page using the authorization component, right? See, the flow is same. All we have is this mock API handler. Okay, and suppose if we have let us assume that mock enabled is 0. So what we'll do is we'll send the call to the backend, which might be Node, Express, or whatever, any backend technologies. So it will send and it will grab the response, and it will send to this Axios adapter. Okay, from this Axios adapter, it will go to the user field. Okay, so for this print, we are not focusing too much on the backend. but we are focusing on this two authentication providers, which is Firebase and which is use JWT, that is JSON Web Token format. So yep, this is what you are going. This is what our interns are going to do in Sprint One, and this is how basically this is a initial version of our authentication library. Initial version of our authentication library. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you got some essence of what this design is doing, and I hope you understood how are we using multiple providers in the same design without with very minimal changes. We just have to do change these two files, right? And what are the other authentication providers which we are going to provide, or else if we want to expand this, if we want to I mean the we have to implement it, right? We have to implement it in a modular way, and also we have to write our source code in such a way that we need will be able to scale it later. So yeah, I think this is done. Thank you for watching, guys. If you have any queries, please put in the comments. Yeah, thank you so much. Bye bye. Take care.